ידידות וידידים יקרים שלנו, חברי המועדון העסקי אקדמי, חברי חבר הנאמנים שלנו, תומכים ותורמים יקרים, שלום לכולכם. תודה שאתם שוב איתנו גם היום, עדיין לצערנו בשידור מרחוק, מנת חלקנו בין זום לזום. אמנון דיק, נשיא אגודת הידידים, ואני שמחים להזמינכם לצפות במפגש המקוון שלנו אשר תכננו עבורכם. בעוד דקות ספורות התארח אצלנו כבוד השגריר מר דיוויד פרידמן, שגריר ארצות הברית בישראל, אשר יקיים שיחה עם כוכב הבית שלנו, פרופ' עוזי, ראש מרכז דיין ללימודי המזרח התיכון ואפריקה באוניברסיטת תל אביב. רגע לפני שנתחיל, אבקש שוב כתמיד להביע תודתנו ומלוא הערכתנו על תמיכתם באוניברסיטה. במיוחד בימים אלו, שהכל סגור בחוץ, ונדמה לעתים שהכל סוגר עלינו. אי אפשר לראות את הנכדים, אי אפשר לחבק את הנכדים, העבודה, הנאות החיים, הכל קיבל צורה אחרת. שהכל סגור, אנחנו תמיד יודעים וזוכרים שהלב שלכם נשאר פתוח. פתוח לנתינה, פתוח לפילנתרופיה, פתוח לאהבת האדם. אני רוצה לסיים בכמה מילות תקווה שכתב חיים גורי. יהיה טוב, אני מבטיח. בוא קצת שקט, בוא קצת שימום. מגיע לך, הכל כל כך צועק פה, לא גמור. מה שלומך? שואלים אותי ברחוב אנשים למיניהם. שלומי כשלוממי, אני משיב להם, ואז פולטים הם הנחה קצרה. כשותפים ליצרה. יהיה טוב, אני מבטיח, כאיש סודו של המשיח. נמשיך להאמין בטוב, כמו שכתב המשורר חיים גורי, ולייחל לטוב. ואנחנו לא מוותרים גם השנה על אף אחד ואחת מכם, גם בתקופה הזו, ולכן אני מזמינה אתכם, למי שטרם עשה זאת, להצטרף אלינו או לחדש את דמי החברות. מאחלת לכם הנאה מההרצאה. אנו מקווים לראות אתכם בקרוב באוניברסיטה שלנו, בלי המסכות, עם פנים מהירות, מלאי חיוכים. תודה.
Ambassador Friedman, distinguished guests, friends of Tel Aviv University, I welcome you all. Mr. Ambassador, let me thank you first for having this gracious invitations to speak with you about developments in our ever-changing region. The year 2020 has been a tumultuous year. What we got here, of course, is the COVID-19, once in a century kind of pandemic. But I would say that alongside with that, our region has witnessed some very, very positive, in my opinion, developments, which I would like to focus my talk to you and the interview on these things. With your permission, Mr. Ambassador, let me start with the Abraham Accord.
Sure.
The one who specializes in Middle Eastern history, while looking at it deeply, gets the idea that this is kind of a breakthrough, definitely, has the potential of a game changer. What I would like to ask you, Mr. Ambassador, is to what we should expect on top of it. Any other Arab states actually are going to follow suit? What is your prospect with regard to the geopolitical architecture in this region after or in the post-agreements with the UAE and Bahrain?
Well, thank you, Professor, for inviting me to join you, and look forward to a good discussion today. And my greetings go out to all your listeners and to all the students at Tel Aviv University, which is a terrific institution. In August, we reached our first agreement, and then it was an agreement in principle with the United Arab Emirates. And I was asked, how do you look at it? And I used the word then that it's an icebreaker. It's the first, major agreement between Israel and an Arab nation in 25 years. By analogy, I look at the Emirates. We refer to Nachshon ben Aminadav as being, the leader. He jumped into the Red Sea, and that was sort of the role of the Emirates. They went first, and they'll always be the first nation in the region, and they're an excellent partner. They've always been an excellent partner of the United States in many ways, and now we have this wonderful partnership blooming with Israel. It turned out that it didn't take long for the second nation to come online. Bahrain was there with us on September 15th as a second country making peace with Israel, along with the Emirates at a ceremony on the south lawn of the White House. Where is this going? I really think the sky's the limit. I think that over time, and I can't be pinned down to a year or a month, but I think in our lifetimes, God willing, we will see an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict as we've traditionally thought of it, the notion of a 22-member Arab League that is united in their opposition to Israel, their refusal to recognize Israel. I think it'll come to an end. Doesn't mean that all 22 Arab League nations will get on board or get on board soon. It will be incremental, but I have no doubt that it will grow 5, 10, maybe more countries over time. And we're having discussions with many of them now. Each one has their own issues. Each one has their own population dynamics. So it's not a one-size-fits-all type of arrangement, but we're having lots of discussions already, and I'm enormously optimistic. I agree with you. It could be a real game changer in the region, and you study this region more than I do. So I'm grateful to know that you agree with that.
Well, I mean, it's at least for me, it's the kind of a very, very clear phenomenon that the U.S. administration has taken a critical role in, as you said, Mr. Ambassador, breaking the ice between Israel and the Arab world. And there is kind of a huge potential for creating of a different, I would say, geopolitical chessboard in the Middle East. But with your permission, Mr. Ambassador, let's take the other end of the spectrum, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. And this is kind of a well-known, finding that Iran has sown seeds of subversion, of instability in the region, and there are many, many Arab states which do suffer from what we call actually Iranian negative penetration. I can name 4 or 5 capital Arab cities, Sana'a, Damascus, Baghdad, Beirut, which do suffer, from Iranian negative penetration. And my question is that, having left or after leaving the JCPOA and coming up with all these pressure that was, means of pressure that was put on Iran, economically speaking, diplomatically speaking, militarily speaking, one still asks himself whether this is enough to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. And the question is, if at all, what more can be done to that effect?
So I think that while it's not the only reason for Israel to develop stronger relations with the Gulf, it's one of the reasons. And I think you look at our Iran strategy, it now, I think, fits into 2 complementary packages. Traditional package is maximum pressure. We exited the JCPOA. Even yesterday, we significantly increased the sanctions on Iranian financial institutions. I think they are effectively cut off from the world economy. It's having an effect. You see the Iranians don't have the resources that they once did to engage in malign activity in Syria. There is some evidence of pullback, nothing satisfactory, but it's moving in the right direction. Hezbollah is clearly weaker than it was a couple of years ago. We still have work to do in Iraq, and obviously Yemen is a challenge. But you have that work that we're doing with our partners, including, of course, with the government of Israel, to maximize the pressure. Now that's the if you will, the antagonistic side of it. Now you have the other side, which is not only do you put pressure on your enemies, but you empower your allies. So now you look at the region today versus a few months ago, and now you have Israel with an ally, soon to become, I think, a much more active and powerful ally, right on the Straits of Hormuz, right? It's no longer, 800 miles away. It's right there, and that's the Emirates. And of course, in that region, there'll be more. Bahrain and obviously has joined, and there'll be more. And so what the Iranians are seeing is 2 things. They're seeing that as they continue on their path, their situation is deteriorating, internally, there are an enormous amount of challenges that they now have internally, but also they see those that are opting for a path towards peace with Israel and strengthening their relationship with America. They are becoming stronger. I'm not talking about militarily stronger. I'm talking about, having these relationships that ultimately make the Emirates or Bahrain or whoever else joins, they'll be more prosperous, they'll be more secure, they'll be more closely aligned with the greatest power on earth, and they will have the benefits of partnering with Israel, which is still I think overwhelmingly, the most advanced country in the region in terms of understanding Iran, preparing for Iran, being able to, in various ways, resist the threats from Iran. So there's a positive aspect of this and a negative aspect, and both of them are now coming together. So I think it's a very complementary strategy. And some of us in Washington have looked at it as simply as the Iranians hate the agreement with the Emirates and with Bahrain and others. If they hate it so much, it must be good for the world and the region, and I think it is.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Let me just move to the Palestinian fold. And we have witnessed kind of a blunt criticism coming from people like Abu Mazen, Saeb Arikat, Mahmoud Abbas and Saeb Arikat against those states who just signed an agreement with Israel, UAE, Bahrain, even Saudi Arabia and others. Palestinians, and this is kind of prevailing assumption when it comes to official figures there, they feel as if they were neglected and left behind. I would like, Mr. Ambassador, actually to ask for your opinion about what's going on with regard to the Palestinians. What should and must be said to the Palestinian leadership, especially in the aftermath of those agreements, about the prospects, about the future, in what way they can and should use the President Trump's deal, which was actually submitted and it's still on the table. And the follow-up question with you, and I would like to have your observation about that. There are talks here and there and across the Arab world saying that maybe this Palestinian leadership is not able, for all means and purposes, to take the burden of this mission of peace and move forward with it. And having said that, any other Palestinian alternative leadership, young people coming from Ramallah or others who could take actually the lead and maybe in the future would definitely fulfill or make these things materialize?
So there's a lot to unpack in that question. It's a great question, but there are a few different components. First of all, the notion that the Palestinians have now been neglected by the Arab world, I would say just the opposite. I would say the Palestinians have been indulged by the Arab world, by the European Union, by others. They have been people have made excuses for them for their malign activity for generations. They've received enormous amounts of money, mostly, by the way, by the United States. The United States has given more money per capita to the Palestinian Authority than everyone else, I think, combined since Oslo. We spent an enormous amount of money trying to build up the Palestinian society. Nobody's got much to show for it. The leadership has put a lot of money in their pocket. Abu Mazen's wealthy. His friends are wealthy. You see how the Prime Minister of Israel travels. I was able to travel with him back from the ceremony on September 15th. He travels on a chartered El Al flight. He gets a couple of seats in the front of the plane. Seats that lots of people fly on. And Abu Mazen flies on a $75 million Boeing business jet wherever he wants all around the world, when he has a GDP per capita of 1/20th the size of Israel. So it's demonstrable that the leadership favors their own personal interests against the will of the Palestinian people. They failed. And to a certain extent, the world has enabled that failure. I think we used to do it in America. Not anymore. President Trump has stopped. But we used to enable the Palestinians. The Europeans have enabled the Palestinians. Just this week, I think they've gotten it right, where they're saying, look, we're not going to give you any money anymore if you refuse to take the tax revenues from Israel that you're entitled to. So even the European Union is starting to take a realistic view. And in the Gulf, the Arab League has indulged the Palestinians for a generation. I think the expectation among all these players was that the Palestinians eventually, would condemn terrorism, move closer towards a realistic peace with Israel, and develop practical solutions. One of the things I found when I got on this job was the Palestinian leadership repeatedly rejected economic opportunity in the West Bank because they felt that would hurt their narrative of victimization. So they would prefer that their people suffer and remain angry than get the benefits of economic aid. Real economic aid. I'm not talking about handouts. I'm talking about investment, real investment in infrastructure in the West Bank. It's been on the table for 3 years. They don't want it because to them it's a normalization of contact. They don't want to normalize until they get everything they want. This is a terrific policy if you're the leader and you're wealthy and you live in a palace and you have everything you want. It's a terrible policy for the 2.5 million people living in Judea and Samaria that could live better. Now, the question about the leadership goes to a second level, which is, who is the leadership? There's 2.5 million people living in the West Bank. There's 2 million living in Gaza. They're separate leadership, hostile to each other. Hamas is a great threat to the Palestinian Authority. If there were elections held tomorrow, I don't think any of us know really, which side would prevail. Some people say Hamas would win in the West Bank and the PA would win in Gaza because everybody is so unhappy with their existing leadership. But the reality is there is no leadership. You couldn't shake hands with anybody today with any sense of assurance that tomorrow we move forward on an agreement, because nobody can deliver the Palestinian people because they have thrived on conflict. So where will this lead? We're not in the business of engineering leadership changes. We're not good at it. No country is really good at engineering leadership for another country. They have to come to that view on their own. What we can do, in ways that couldn't have been done a generation ago, is we have the ability to reach the people because they're smart people. They have access to the internet. They have access to social media, and we put on the table a plan. It may not be everything that the Palestinians want. It may be something they'd like to change, but it presented a realistic solution that would have also resulted in a highly favorable economic boom to the region. Again, investment, not charity, an investment, infrastructure. The leadership, ran to the General Assembly and ripped it all up, publicly, and it's just not responsible. And I think when the other nations in the area, especially the ones who, don't have large Palestinian populations themselves, so when all the countries in the Gulf, when they looked at this, they said, you know what? There comes a time when a country needs to worry about its own citizens more than the Palestinians. And people are starting to realize that if they hold their own progress back in order to facilitate the Palestinians, they could be waiting forever to normalize with Israel, and the people of these countries will lose out. And people are sort of coming to that realization. And even the fact that the EU was able to recognize it this week, they've been the most indulgent of the Palestinians. Tells me that if the Palestinians are reading the tea leaves correctly, they need to engage. They need to engage with Israel. We're happy to play a constructive role, or they can engage directly without us. We don't need to be there, but I think we could play a very productive role. But the Palestinians need to stop relying upon the narrative of victimization. It served them well for a couple of generations. I think that time is coming to an end.
Well, how very observant of you, Mr. Ambassador. I just can tell you that many Arab friends actually do reiterate while talking with me, me with them, the fact that, you know, in Arabic it is being put like that, كل واحد لحاله, which means everybody for itself. And Palestinians were, for decades actually, were under the impression that Arab fold is definitely there for them 100%, no more. Let me tell you that the whole equation has been changed. You know, people were telling for years, no normalization or full normalization between Israel and Arab country can be achieved before a comprehensive solution between Israelis and Palestinians is there. And let me tell you, the whole chessboard has been changed that way that everybody should come up with something else. Let me, with your permission, Mr. Ambassador, take kind of a middle-of-the-road case of a case study, Lebanon. A ruined state, definitely, on the verge of economic collapse. We just saw what happened in the port of Beirut. But let me ask you, what is your take about the maritime agreement, so to speak, which says maybe that economy is the bottom line here, and that this is the cracks where the cracks of matters lie? I mean, what is your take about that?
I think it's a real reason for cautious optimism. Once all they agreed to was a framework so far, right, to sit and talk. So that to me is a basis for cautious optimism. If they reach an agreement on the maritime border, that would be a real basis for optimism, because what happens next? What happens next is Lebanon is able to exploit some gas fields that have proven to be extraordinarily valuable. Now, it's in Israel's interest, it's in America's interest for Lebanon to develop some wealth, you know, to have some assets that they want to protect, and and obviously when you have assets that you want to protect, you become much more concerned about making trouble in someone else's backyard, because then you put your own assets at risk. So, look, Lebanon, you're 100% right. Lebanon has been a failed state for a long time. With Hezbollah in charge, and they are, there are limits to how much progress can be made. But this is very much a step in the right direction. If they can begin to commercialize their Eastern Mediterranean gas fields, I think there's a lot of money that they can make there. I think that will become a game changer. It will cause the Lebanese people to really, I think, have much more skin in the game, frankly, much more to lose and more to gain. It gives them much more of a stake in their own country, and I think they will be much more cautious about allowing, because they have so much to lose, about allowing Lebanon to really fall into the hands of Hezbollah. Lebanon's not going to, nobody's going to invest the kind of money that they need to invest in Lebanon if it's run by Hezbollah. I mean, you know, you look at Noble Energy, you know, which is now Chevron is the prime principal owner of Tamar and Leviathan. Chevron's not coming into Lebanon to make a deal with Hezbollah. They're not. So it really has the potential to be an enormous benefit to the region, but I still be cautious because we're still not there yet.
Broadly speaking, Mr. Ambassador, I mean, we have talked about the foreign policy achievement of the Trump administration in the recent years in the Middle East. There is something, it is a prevailing assumption, that says that America is pivoting to Asia, is sort of withdrawing from the Middle East. Can you bring in sort of a balance when it comes to those two different phenomena?
Look, I think America, the American people are weary of foreign wars. They've been weary of foreign wars for, frankly, a long time, and there is a desire to be less involved in military conflicts so far away from home. I think that's a trend in America, almost irrespective of the administrations, because I just think these wars are very unpopular in America, as you could imagine. The way I look at it is that it's it's an opportunity as much as it is a risk, because should America draw down further, and again, I don't want to predict how that might play out. It may not play out over the next reasonable time, because I mean there are lots of factors that go into it. But as America reduces its footprint in the Middle East, it doesn't necessarily mean that the threats to America have been reduced in the Middle East. So what do you do as you shrink your footprint, but you haven't necessarily shrunk the threat profile? You become more reliant upon your allies. And to my thinking, there is no ally that America has in the Middle East that's in the same zip code as Israel. And I've seen that firsthand. I've seen how the Israeli military collaborates with the American military, how the intelligence agencies work together. It's the one part of my job that I really can't share with people, but I can just tell you, it gives me great pride in both countries, and great excitement as I see how closely they work together. And I think should America determine that it will reduce its profile, I think America's support for Israel only will go up because Israel's presence and its contribution to America's security gets even more vital. It's already vital. I mean, Israel does a lot to keep America safe. We tend to think of, the United States as keeping Israel safe, and of course, the U.S. does a lot for Israel in many, many ways. But in some ways, Israel helps to keep America safe because it has perspectives and exposure to certain risks that it just knows better than anybody else. And so I really think that over time, whatever happens in terms of America's footprint here, and I'm not predicting because I just don't know right now, but whatever that happens, if it does shrink, it will be accompanied with a commensurate level of support and reliance upon Israel.
You know, Mr. Ambassador, listening to your remarks and observation, it is clear that the relationship between Israel and the United States, at least for Israel, is irreplaceable. And I want to tell you that at the Moshe Dayan Center in Tel Aviv University, where I'm the director, we have just signed an MOU with the Trends Research Center, a think tank in Abu Dhabi. And this is kind of a fresh start and a very good beginning. And I wonder if, and I know that we will always be helped out by you guys, I mean, in the embassy and everywhere, when it comes even to the, academic activity of us in the UAE and Bahrain. And I do hope that, like in the case of UAE, American University in Dubai or American University in Sharjah, I hope to see a branch of TAU University in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. And I want to just tell you that for me it's a great honor and privilege to sit with you here today and to talk about the developments in our ever-changing region. I would like to take the opportunity to just thank the embassy staff and the Friends of Tel Aviv University, Mr. Amnon Dik and Ms. Adi Olmet, who are running this whole show, and all these people who make this happen. Thank you again, Mr. Ambassador. It was a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to future cooperation with you.
Well,
thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and I believe you will see Tel Aviv University and other Israeli institutions with a presence in Abu Dhabi or Dubai or elsewhere in the Gulf. I think it's just a matter of time and probably not a lot of time. So thank you.
In Hebrew we say, Insha'Allah.
Bezrat Hashem.
Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you.